Ali vs. Frazier, Michael vs. Magic, Nadal vs. Federer. In the pantheon of sport, this world has bared witness to some of the most memorable head-to-head competitions of all time. But in poker, we had yet to see a heated rivalry that could even approach that same level of supernatural skill and talent until today. In one corner, we have Magnus Carlsen, chess grandmaster, 5-time reigning world champion, the highest ELO ever achieved. Simply one of the greatest strategic minds that has ever walked the face of this planet. And in the other corner, we have Nick Austin, a middle school student who makes 3-second dance videos on the internet and is one of the greatest contributors in history to the proliferation of attention deficit disorder and the degeneracy of our youth. Who will come out on top in this epic battle of intellectual titans? Let's find out.
Curtis Jackson.
Raise to 50. Oh, Bryson.
Whatever it is.
Good clip, though. Good clip. You run games at your house?
300. Good clip, if nothing
Mariano
else.
has a lot of those.
What'd you say?
Do you run games at your house?
Yeah, all the time.
Really?
In theory.
Show.
I mean, I don't.
In theory, they're like imaginary
In an imaginary
games.
world.
Imaginary world, yeah.
With fake money?
Right.
Money involved then.
Yeah.
It's
It-
illegal
it's
to run
VR
poker
money.
games at your house.
It's V-Bucks.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, V-Bucks we run. I got a couple gift cards, bro. I haven't used it.
Whoa, the greens are coming out. Are they the tilted greens or the happy greens? Stay tuned to find out.
I mean, if he was trying to get value out of a good hand, he wouldn't have raised it like that. I think he's got. He's trying to get $100 from all of us with 7 deuce.
You want to play V-Bucks? Absolutely.
I'll make it easier for you. I'm folding out a turn.
So a lot of action here pre-flop. Mariano opens in +1, Magnus then 3-bets, Bryce Hall then cold calls the 3-bet with King 5 off because it blocks 5-7 off and 5 deuce off, and then Nick re-raises from the small blind with Ace Jack. Mariano folds, Magnus calls, and then after a long tank that would have made Christoph Vogelsang proud, Bryce makes one of the greatest laydowns we've seen in history. Now neither Magnus's nor Nick's play are going to be solver approved, so similar to our last video, we're going to use these 9 max 200 big blind ranges as a starting point, and then we'll add both Magnus's 3-4 suited and Nick's Ace Jack off to the ranges at low frequency.
I would have beyond that true. You did it.
700.
700.
So both of these plays on the flop are pretty standard. Nick makes a small c-bet, and he'll want to be betting with high frequency on this king-high, relatively disconnected board to leverage his superior 4-bet range and to target the many whiffs and very weak hands in Magnus's bottom heavy range represented by these blue colors. And against such a small bet, most pairs will want to call in Magnus's shoes. Though if Magnus was holding a mid to lower pocket pair, which has fewer outs compared to 8x and 4x, folding would be fine as well, given that so much of Nick's range should be ace-king or better, which these hands are crushed by.
We are in overtime. I hope you guys are enjoying the show on this Wednesday evening. We're back at it tomorrow, 5 p.m. Pacific time. Bart Hansen is playing 10, 20, 40 tomorrow night. And then Friday, of course, our big game. Bart will be commentating on that one. And then on Monday, DGAF and Raver Poker will be in the game for Max Payne. Hoodie Allen in the chat. What's up, Hoodie?
Cheers.
Not losing all your money.
Yeah, let's cheers to that.
Thanks for joining us, Eric Peterson. And Josias
No, it wasn't even bad.
Braganza. Hello.
That was bad.
I gotta be honest, that one was tough.
Appreciate your support, Lee French. Get a bet here from Nick Magnus. Calling again.
So Nick is undeterred and barrels, which according to strict GTO is not the preferred action. But since we aren't sure about these ranges, how might one approach this spot from a conceptual GTO standpoint? Well, first things first, this 9 is not a great card for Nick's range because it has a higher probability of interacting with Magnus's 4-bet calling range, which should be heavier with middling pocket pairs and suited combos like Ace-9, Jack-10, and 10-9 of spades. Plus, Nick is out of position, so he'll probably want to do a decent amount of checking in this spot, which in turn means that he probably shouldn't bluff 100% of his unmade hands based on one of the fundamental principles we discussed last time, balance. Now, before all of you exploitative nerds write your little comments about how being balanced isn't important in a game like this, ask yourself, what is the alternative? Do you think that he should just simply continue barreling with 100% of his unmade hands? I don't know how much experience Magnus has with poker, but in chess he is not known to be a tight-knit, so it would seem that using some discretion here would be appropriate. Also, if you think it would be a good idea to attempt to strategically exploit someone who played Garry Kasparov to a draw while you were still in your daddy's nutsack, well, good luck with that. So assuming Nick will want to bluff some weak hands and give up on others, how should he make this decision? Well, from a conceptual GTO standpoint, there are two primary considerations: incremental equity and card removal. Both of these are based on our second fundamental principle of probabilities. Specifically, we'll want to prioritize bluffing with hands that have the greatest probability of drawing ahead of villain's value and/or that have the greatest probability of generating a fold. So one simple strategy Nick could implement here would be to bluff most or even all of his draws, but to give up on everything else. If Nick is 4-betting with Ace-Jack off, presumably he has some Ace-X of spade combos here, and he may even have Queen-Jack, Queen-10, or Jack-10 suited as well, which would give him a straight draw on this turn. But if Nick doesn't have enough draws here to bluff, he could also bluff with some non-draws as well, based on card removal. To do this, Nick would need to think of the hands that Magnus would have likely floated the small bet on the flop, but would be more likely to fold to a turn barrel. Perhaps something like Ace-Queen, Ace-Jack, or Ace-10 of clubs that had the over and the backdoor flush draw. Or perhaps something like pocket jacks with the Jack of spades. If we believe that Magnus has these sorts of hands on the turn, then Nick's specific combo would not be a very good barreling candidate, because holding the Ace of clubs and the Jack of spades makes it impossible for Magnus to hold these same cards, thereby decreasing the probability he will fold. So although a strict GTO disciple might try to emulate the solver perfectly and get all of these suits and frequencies down precisely, from a conceptual GTO standpoint, one way Nick could rationally differentiate between his non-draws would be to continue with his Ace-X combos, excluding the ones holding the Ace of clubs. So what about Magnus's call? Well, our bluff catching principles will mirror the bluffing principles we just discussed. We know we can't just call 100% of our bluff catchers or we will be overcalling, so we will prioritize calling with combos that have the ability to draw ahead, such as flush and straight draws, and or that are unblocking Nick's likely bluffs. And given that Nick's 4-bet range should be Broadway heavy, calling with 5-4 or 4-3 suited makes sense since it unblocks all of these bluffs.
Yeah, I like that. Cheers.
That's a good one there.
Hey,
Sorry about it.
no, don't worry.
Magnus with a pair of fours can beat nothing.
Yeah, my redemption arc is coming.
But we saw earlier on he considered calling with king high. If Nick bets again here,
Crazy good return.
Oh yeah. I made that only 5
Hey, dude, that was very close to not being returned.
can Magnus find the call?
Hand away from this.
I have no read on what's going on here. And I feel like an idiot. I've been trying to figure it out. I'm very confused.
You're going 3 streets, eh? Actually, somehow, I don't believe you at all.
Your instincts are spot
Like,
on.
there aren't a lot of hands. You have ace-king, obviously. There aren't a lot of hands that you would just go 3 streets with there. Like, I have so many of these hands that crush this board. I just don't believe you at all. This is the problem.
The fact that Nick
I'm
just
gonna
got
look really
bluffed
stupid,
Yeah, he's like no.
has to be a factor in this hand.
Like, but I just don't believe you. I don't believe you at all.
Good.
Wow, what a call! What a call!
So in all seriousness, I have to give props where it's due. For Nick to have the guts to fire a third bullet against this indomitable, intimidating force with a man bun is pretty impressive, especially when he hasn't gone through puberty yet. And from a strategic standpoint, I don't think this is a terrible bluff either, particularly with the Jack of Spades, which blocks the most likely straight in Magnus's range. Now it also blocks Ace Jack of Spades, which Magnus would likely fold, but if Nick was holding the Ace of Spades, it would block even more folds, so Nick's specific hand will not be his worst bluffing candidate here, and he probably doesn't have many other weak hands left in this particular spot. Now what about Magnus's call? Well, according to this sim, 4-3 is a fold, but again, these ranges aren't perfect, so let's try to break things down from a conceptual GTO standpoint. As is the case with any defending spot, Magnus should want to call with some of his bluff catchers and fold others, but since we're on the river, this decision will come down solely to card removal. Ideally, Magnus will want to prioritize calling hands that block value and unblock bluffs. On the positive side, 4-3 of hearts definitely unblocks bluffs, which are mostly ace-x combos, including the most prominent bluff, which is Nick's actual hand, ace-jack. This is why, even though 4-3 is a pure fold in this sim, the EV for calling this hand is much higher than 5-4, since the 5 blocks ace-5 and 6-5. However, on the negative side, 4-3 does not block any value, which according to this sim is mostly comprised of pocket aces. Now on the other hand, didn't we just say that most of Nick's bluffs should have come from ace-x combos? Yes, we did, but in this case, from a probability standpoint, ace-x blocks more value than it does bluffs. And this is a good example of the type of spot where you'll need to adapt your conceptual GTO principles to the actual specifics of your particular situation and villain, since the range of your real-life villain will not look exactly like this. Putting aside the sim, you have to ask yourself, do you think Nick is more likely to have ace-x as a bluff, or aces or ace-king for value? If you think he has more ace-x as a bluff, then Magnus should be more inclined to call with 4-3. But if you think Nick has more ace-x for value, then Magnus should be more inclined to call with something like ace-10 or ace-4 instead. And this is why we entitled our last video the way we did. Even when your opponent is not playing in accordance with the Nash equilibrium, which will be all the time, the only thing that should change are his perceived ranges. The core fundamentals of this game remain true and universal. This means that you can still apply game theoretic concepts to villains in balanced ranges to help you decide the best way to maximize your EV. So why did Magnus end up making this call? Well, let's revisit his dialogue leading up to the action.
You have ace-king, obviously. There aren't a lot of hands that you would just go 3 streets with there. Like, I have so many of these hands that crush this board.
So say what you want about whether this call was technically correct, you have to admit that it is impressive for a relative beginner to have this level of sophistication in regards to his understanding of range dynamics. First, Magnus identifies what he believes to be the value portion of Nick's range, ace-king. Then he says that he doesn't think Nick has many hands that would go 3 streets with air, which might seem like a curious comment because if Nick doesn't have trash in his range, then it would make Magnus more likely to fold. But when Magnus says air here, I don't think he's referring to total trash, I think he's actually referring to hands of mediocre strength. Recall that right after this comment, Magnus says that he just has so many hands that crush this board. In other words, since Magnus's 4-bet calling range should have the advantage with nutted combos like 8s, 9s, 10s, 8-9, 10-9, and Queen-Jack, this means that Nick needs to be very selective about the hands that he triple barrels with for value, i.e. Nick can't be betting thinly in this spot. This is why, if we go back to Nick's decision, ace-king was actually too weak to bet for value, and so the bottom threshold for value betting was actually pocket aces without a spade, because these combos unblock many of the hands Magnus could call with, such as King X, Ace 10, and Ace 8 of spades. So in short, Magnus thinks that Nick has very few combos that would want 3 streets of value on this board, which in turn may make Nick's actual range disproportionately bluff heavy, which if true, would almost certainly make 4-3 a pure call from a game theory perspective based on an exploitative adjustment. Now it might just be me, but I think this kid could have a bright future in the world of strategy games. So that's the video for today. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay balanced.
Never stop believing. So rise, rise, rise.
I don't believe you at all.